Dr. Fox. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Barron, you've worked as a tip worker in Seattle and in Washington State, where they eliminated the tip credits. You've gotten something of a preview of where this new rule from this administration would take us. In your experience, would you say that your fellow tipped workers, that they prefer the tipped system?
Absolutely. They prefer tips over a flat wage. Tips provide us the opportunity to maximize our income and make more than any employer is either willing or can afford to pay. And so why wouldn't we want to do that?
Yeah, well said. And you say in your testimony here that with the elimination of the tip credit, workers like myself have been subject to surcharges, service changes, non-transparent pay models, elimination of tip lines, elimination of tipping. Mm-hmm. I mean, for all the millions of tip workers across America, with this new rule, do you think it would be fair to say that they're coming after your tips, that bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. are coming after your tips?
Absolutely, and I'll give you an example, and that's the tip pooling rule. The one that Patty Murray changed, the Federal Labor Standards Act language that allows employers to take our tips, if you want to talk about wage theft, an opportunity to wage theft, to take our tips so that they can pay back of the house workers or non-tipped workers because they can't afford to pay the high wages. They can't afford to keep back of the house wages competitive. So now we have in all the one fair wage states this tip pooling rule that allows the employers to take our tips and pay non-tipped employees. And it's ludicrous. We're making a lot less money.
Thank you very much. I think that's an important takeaway from this hearing, is that they are coming after your tips. Bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
Just like Trump did, right?
Trump didn't do that. Patty Murray did that.
Excuse me. I wasn't speaking to you, Ms. Jatmarm. Okay, Mr. Boucher, you're a restaurant owner, is that correct?
I am.
And you testified that you've actually seen examples of restaurants closing down altogether because of the elimination of tipping. Can you explain a little bit about the cause and effect there?
Sure. So there were two restaurants in New Hampshire. I won't name them right now, but they went to that model where they paid their employees a flat wage, and they had it on their menus that customers did not have to tip, and that was reflective in their pricing of the menu. And it resulted in these employees, they didn't last. One restaurant, I think, closed in 6 months, and one didn't even last a year. Because these employees, think about it. You want to work Saturday night for $15 an hour, or would you rather work Monday lunch for $15 an hour? So what happened was these employees said, you know what, I'm going to work $15 an hour at lunch for this restaurant. I'm going to get a tipped job at this other restaurant. And so they eventually lost all their employees because they could make more in a tip wage environment.
Yeah, and we've seen this in California with the COVID shutdowns, and other very bad policies have caused restaurants to shut down, and in that case it hurts not just the workers, but you have families who save money to go to their favorite restaurant once a month. It's not there anymore. You have couples who go there every year on their anniversary. You have folks who, they're one night out a week, they like to go to this place with a friend, suddenly it's not there. So I think that's another takeaway from this hearing, is that the bureaucrats in DC are coming after your favorite restaurant. Now, of course, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush when it comes to folks at the Department of Labor, because we have Mr. DeCamp here, who was the administrator of the Wage and Hour Division, and had a very different set of priorities when he was there. And I think one of the things you mentioned in your testimony is that surveys actually show overwhelmingly that workers prefer the tip model, right?
Well, that's correct. I mean, I think everybody would like to have their cake and eat it too, and have a very high cash wage and keep all their tips, but that's not the reality. When faced with the practical reality of either a cash wage plus, at a sub-minimum wage plus tips, or a higher flat wage, workers overwhelmingly want the opportunity to get tips.
Yeah, it's like set 90% or something like that.
97 is the research I've seen.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We saw similar numbers with another policy that's been fiated by the Department of Labor, the independent contractor rule, where they want to force people out of the independent contractor model, even though 90% prefer that model. Now they want to force people take away their tips, even though 90% say they prefer getting tips. What do you think is going on here? I mean, you were in charge of the Wage and Hour Division there. There's new leadership now, and they're consistently enacting policies without involving Congress that specifically do exactly the opposite of what workers want. What do you think is behind all this?
I think it's bureaucratic arrogance. agencies get used to the courts rubber stamping what they do. I think that's going to change now that Chevron has been overruled, and I think that agencies are going to be held more strictly accountable to adhering to the laws that Congress enacts.
Thanks very much. My time has expired, and I will now recognize the representative from Utah, Mr. Owens, for 5 minutes.